Oh, hey, David.
Hey Paul, how you doing?
I think I'm doing good.
It looks like it's very early for you, my friend. What time is it your side?
It's 8. It's not that early.
Oh,
It's not
okay.
that early. Yeah.
Nah, it's not so bad. It's not like 5 in the morning. It
It
looks
does
early.
look dark. It's been some dreary weather.
What do they call it? Sweater weather?
It's that kind of weather. Yeah.
Welcome, Michael. Hey, Michael.
No, it's the opposite for Michael. It is not very early for Michael. Or it is very early.
It is. It depends how you look at it. It's either the start of the day or the end of the day. It's this like welcome to the twilight zone with Michael and friends. Your late night radio host.
Michael, I'm actually starting to wonder, do you ever sleep or do you just actually moonlight as a radio talk show? So who else has had a supremely messed up calendar since daylight savings happened? Is it just me?
Did it happen? I don't know. We don't do it. It's like the rest of the world changes except for me, which is harder in some ways, but
Everyone else has to change, but not me. I'm perfect the way I am.
That's all of Arizona, right?
all of Arizona, parts of the Navajo reservation, Nigeria. I don't know what other ones.
Wow.
Some places are half an hour. If you've ever dealt with time zones on the back end.
Well, if you ask me, you're doing it right.
Chad, have you ever seen the Tom Scott video from Computer File about time zones?
No.
He starts getting into leap seconds. Let me see if I can find it. It's very funny. And we invented a Unix timestamp, and that was supposed to solve the problems. And of course, it didn't solve anything.
Yeah. I was around for Y2K. I reviewed a lot of COBOL code for Y2K bugs.
I'd love to be in the discussions of like, should we use 16 bits to represent or like Anami bits to represent the epoch? Well, that means it's going to be done at 2030 something. I was like, that's okay. We're not going to be still using it then, or the world should be ended by then. Like, then come Y2K, the world's supposed to be over now. What happened? You guys still using this?
I mean, I think it's more like this would increase the size of things significantly. It's just not worth it. Storage was not cheap.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining. I was not as prepared this month, and so I have 3 topics, and if you want to, we can vote. There's not that many people on the call, but Hi. Just going to be helping today. We can just kind of figure out what we're in the mood to talk about, but the 3 I had in mind were maybe a more fun one and something we don't think about often related to snippets, but the idea of having executable snippets. I think pretty big on that, what that could mean to the category. We could think a little bit smaller and more tactical, but potentially try and uncover a longer term plan for rich editing of markdown content in the context of the repository view or the web editor or the source editor, or however we want to frame that. Or we could go think really big and reopen all the discussions around remote development environments and try and stay more along the lines of thinking big and not retroing previous attempts at this.
Are we supposed to vote in the document?
You could drag a little circle over to where you think you and I'll just you can
many
keep yourself
circles do I
honest
get?
and I was
That's
gonna
what the
say let's
circles
keep it
are
honest and to
for.
one per person, but if you really wow, I can watch in
Well,
Wix,
I
see
have
the
no idea how
trail
this
of your
works.
cursor.
Oh, okay,
Can't
I
drag
can't.
anything.
I
just
cannot
You could
drag
also
anything.
verbalize. No, you're
You
not
need to
logged
sign
in, I
in.
guess.
Seems like only Michael has access to vote there. Who was
Well, there's
who's the
the
one?
trick.
Who was the one being able to drag the things? Oh wow.
Michael and Paul can drag.
I'm
Okay.
trying to prevent Michael from
It's
voting.
blocking.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like Pong, but like
Boy,
Okay. I cannot move
product.
mine. So,
All right,
okay.
well,
I want
what
executable snippets.
you want
That's what we
executable
want.
snippets?
Yeah, I want
Chad's
executable
got-
snippets as well.
All right. Chad's got executable snippets. Dennis got executable snippets. Oh, all right. Well, David's got executable snippets. I'm gonna go with everybody's jumping off the bridge, so I'll jump to and do executable snippets. Paul, don't feel bad. I saw you drag it
You'll
from
feel
dev
bad.
environments.
That's
I think
okay.
that's a great one for maybe next time.
Okay.
Maybe I can be a little more prepared for it.
I'm just gonna drag some of these circles over while no one's doing it.
Yeah. Let's go. The usual disclaimer on our Think Bigs. Let's try not to get wrapped up too much on the architecture and implementation details. Let's think in the like 1 to 2 year horizon, not so far out that it's like, you know, we'll all be living in the metaverse and stuff like that, but not so near that we have to actually plan milestones around it. And let's think about benefits to the users that the feature will bring, and not so much like, yeah, tactical strategic stuff. My headphones keep automatically pairing over to her iPad, so if you say something and I miss it, it's because I'm trying to recover command with my AirPods. So executable snippets. Let's talk about that's not how you spell executable. Oh man. So executable snippets. Where we are now, right? We have snippets that are multi-file, backed by Git, and so they are versioned. They are unorganized and they are static and not dynamic, we'll say. They can't really do anything other than be snippets and be copied and be edited. So I think on the backlog, we've had this idea of executable snippets, and we might kick off the conversation by talking about what that even means and who would use that. I don't know. What for those that voted for executable snippets, what about it interests you in the feature?
I know there's server side and client side executable snippets, and yeah, I don't know which one we're really talking about when we're talking about and these things, and this like from the server side, like that's the part that I don't really understand, like how that ties in. And you know, if there's like a sequencing thing here, like do you do client side, like, you know, like compile this JavaScript kind of like a code pen, or is it like or or like, thinking really big, like where do we see this thing? Like, are we competing with like Code Sandbox and CodePen and all that stuff? Or yeah, it's very fuzzy for me what we're really trying to achieve with these snippets.
So that's a good point. Let's talk about the difference between built a robot. The difference
somebody have a
between
link
client side.
to the epic or issue around this?
Yeah, I'll pull that up. Also, just realized I'm not sharing my screen, but hopefully you're all looking at the whiteboard.
Do we still employ the raised hands things or something? Or...
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, I was by mistake I pressed clapping hands, and so I probably won't qualify. But now I have whatever, like what raised hand. Okay, what I've pressed all possible buttons. That interface is confusing.
So I look up the epic. Go for it, Dennis.
So the confusion that Michael has is very is quite generic. I think I have the same confusion as well. So because like I will voted for the executable snippets because I just genuinely want to hear what we can do here and whether we can do anything here and whether we really want to do anything about this. Because I was thinking about the same thing the other day when we were discussing the source editor architecture, and I thought, well, it would be really cool to have executable snippets so that we could just play with the isolated snippet and make it run and do some checks for us when we have discussion about what happens if we do that or what happens when we do that, and that would be super cool. The problem is that I sincerely have no idea how we could create that thing. Like we have the executable JavaScript environment through the Code Sandbox and the live preview, right, in WebID, but not more than that technically. So if we say executable snippets, what do we mean? Like, is it just the JavaScript executables, or is it like any snippet should be executable? Or there are so many questions here. So I think we have to figure out what is the ultimate goal. Like, where do we want to add? Like, are we talking about everything executable, and then we are gonna hire probably acquire Code Sandbox to do that for us? But in general, we have to think about this being a digestible part, like that we wouldn't bite much more than we can chew, really. We're a very small team anyway, and we could probably move the live preview for JavaScript files somehow. I don't know. Paul will be the person probably to judge about whether we can do that or not. I know Paul likes to talk about live preview. But otherwise, what do we expect really? Like, is it really just JavaScript, or is it everything executable? What's the plan?
So I would say that we should think big and not think about the limitations of our team as much as the potential benefit that executing code within snippets can offer. So whether it's Paul going off and building this feature himself, or whether we have a team of 20 engineers assigned to it because the market opportunity is huge, or we acquire a company to make this happen, that's kind of that's not the part of the mental exercise that I think we need to focus on. I do think it's potentially a hard problem if we bite off more than we can chew as a team, but I think that it's important to understand the opportunity that we may have with snippets if we were to make them client-side executable, or if we were to make it possible to have server-side execution. So that's, I think, what we should talk about is what are the benefits to either, what are the use cases for either, who would be using those, and in what context. And then a little bit about how we might make that work, but not so much about like, how the, 6 engineers we have on the team are really going to actually do it.
I have my hand raised. I'm going to close my door real fast though, because there's some breakfast.
You don't need to
happening.
raise the hand for that. You're not in school, you know.
Can I go to the bathroom? When we talked about this, the reason I did not vote for this issue because I could not immediately see what was the benefit of executable snippets. But as we were talking about it, specifically as Michael talked about CodePen, it dawned on me, I think there's a pretty neat use case for this, where when I think about project snippets, and it'd be really cool to see a project that is providing some sort of library. You could look through its snippets of live examples off the latest release of the project in use, and actually how it runs and how that looks like, whatever. So I think when we talk about who this would be for and what are the use cases in the win there, I see this being really special for project snippets, demonstrating their library through actual executable code snippets.
David's got his hand up next. Oh, I think actually, sorry, Dennis might have had. I don't know who saw it first.
No. I
work it out amongst himself.
Let's hear what David has. I lowered my hand and then raised it again due to different reason. So yeah, we'll go on then.
I think the reason I found executable snippets interesting is because when I'm thinking about project documentation, so snippets for me are very heavily tied to wiki, and the wiki is the project, a project documentation for developers. And then when I think of executable snippets, I think of Stack Overflow in the way where you're able to copy and paste chunks of code and have them run and be demonstrated to you live in the browser. And I think that would be very powerful within projects for trading context and offering solutions to problems. Because it doesn't necessarily all have to happen inside a merge or inside a code review, but funnily enough, you could probably eventually look to link it back into a code review process if you wanted. That's kind of the direction I see where we might be able to take the wiki executable snippets and snippets in general into something that might be very usable for people who are maintaining repos in GitLab. But I'd be curious to hear what other people think.
Okay. I'm a bit confused. Paul and David raised pretty. Not that I wasn't confused before Paul and David were talking, but now I'm confused a bit more. So I think the points you mentioned are very interesting. So first of all, Paul's point was a really good one about using this in the context of a project where we have. So technically, by default, snippets will somehow like inject. We'll have the library or like the project somehow injected, and have the snippets would have the full context of the project, because that makes sense when the snippets are used in the context of the project, that we have the snippets have knowledge about this project, right? Otherwise, what's like the difference is not that big between the simple snippets and the project ones. How to do this technically is super challenging, I think. And it's like, it's pretty interesting. But what David mentioned is that's an interesting thing. Like, I have never thought about snippets in the context of wiki somehow. And that scenario is kind of interesting. But David, just so that I understand the use case correctly. So you mean when we are writing the wiki page, for example, and we need to include the code snippet, we are just including the snippet, and then would allow it to be executable in the context of the wiki page, right? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's more or less exactly
like Code Sandbox, for example, does when you sort of add a snippet and then you can run it, right? So like Code Sandbox, different sources do allow that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and this means that technically this is not necessarily coupled to the wiki pages scenario, right? Like this would be useful for any scenario where we have our snippets embedded, right? So our snippets are embeddable and they can be embedded everywhere via chat. But that's a pretty neat scenario, and that's exactly what. So technically, there are two different scenarios, right? Like the first one is when we include the snippet somewhere, inject it, and then it's executable on that side. And the other one is when we create sort of a sandbox in our snippets. So like we have up to 10 snippets, up to 10 blobs available to be added for one snippet. So we create some sort of a mini project, we can call it probably. So like sandboxed mini project. And then combining this with what Paul said, where, for example, snippets with the context of within the context of the project have knowledge about the project. That would be super powerful thing, I guess. That would allow to create sort of mini sandboxes for the projects and be able to test, to check different features, check different bugs in isolation without probably writing tests. Just to, we could evaluate this with the client, for example, is this what you do and is this what you expect to get? And that would give us sort of a very tangible and very obvious scenario of what has to be improved or fixed in the project in the first place. But that, like, combining these two ideas would be super powerful, I think. It's going to be super challenging, but very powerful. Okay, let's talk.
So I think
Michael, did you have your hand open?
Oh, did you?
I get my prepositions wrong. Did you have your hand up?
I had it open. I had it up, but then I kind of put it back down because, yeah, I was thinking about what you said earlier about like project snippets and providing like documentation kind of stuff. Then I was thinking like, oh, there's like MDX in the world of React, where you like jam in like React code inside Markdown, and then it all magically happens. But then I was like, oh, with snippets, it's kind of like doing that. And then I was just like, oh, that's just like so that when Dennis was talking about the wiki, I was like, okay, he covered that kind of point. And then the point about Stack Overflow, this one's really interesting because with Stack Overflow, it's good to like sample, like do like, oh, here's how to do like the for loop or something like that. But like sometimes in a big repo like this, it's almost like you might need to run the whole beast to get the code running to run that one little bit. And then this slowly edges towards remote development. And then I was just like, okay, I was just like, I can of worms. So that's why I lowered my hand.
We didn't vote on that one, so you can't start talking about that. Don't get Paul excited.
There was a strong minority voting for that topic.
But at least it got one voting, right? The middle topic didn't get any at all. So I think it's only fair to switch to the remote development topic from time to time now.
But that raises a really good question then. Is there a broad enough and big enough audience that executable snippets would appeal to, that we wouldn't just cover if we leaned into remote development? Like, is there a use case for this, or would we be wasting our time?
What is the target in general, right? Like, who would use this, or like whether it would make any sense to invest time and effort into the feature that would be used by, I don't know, like 1% of our customers potentially at best.
Yeah, and with that thought, I think the use cases, and David, you mentioned like maybe code review, or and when you mentioned Stack Overflow, I'm really thinking about in code review, which is interesting and not a use case I was thinking. I do wonder if sorry, I lost my train of thought, but I did add to our agenda doc. There are some really interesting libraries. Often libraries have to do this like showcasing of what their library can do. And if we thought that would be an interesting use case to solve inside of GitLab, I think that's where executable snippets could be an interesting way to showcase. A user may want to showcase what their library can do. It's tough because there's a lot. I mean, what's the alternative to using executable snippets? And if we can't build something that's more attractive or appealing than alternatives, that's where it may be a challenge.
Cool. So Dennis brought up a good point about what's the objective. And I was like looking at some of this stuff. It's like we don't fully understand how snippets are used. So it might be worthwhile to see like where snippets are being embedded now, and seeing those make a good use case to execute. And so let's say it's a lot of like code snippets about like here's how to do XYZ, or like tutorial like things, and then maybe it's worth rendering that out in client side. But if it's more like snippets as like here's like the git command to like do this like rebase, and it's like documented within the team, you probably wouldn't want that to be executed anytime soon, so that just stays as is. So as the group responsible for snippets, I think personally I don't really know the answer to this, like exactly how snippets are used in like as deep as I would like, or I don't think we have that information. But yeah, I think this might be a good deep dive into like snippets. How are they actually used?
Sorry, Dennis, your hand's up. You can go.
You see orange?
Yeah, so we're about to say something, Eric, or?
I was just saying, I was going to say something when I saw your hand was up, so you can go first if you want.
Yeah, I was about to mention about one thing about what Paul mentioned. And now, while I was listening to Michael, since he has so pacifying voice, I completely forgot what I was about to tell about. That's embarrassing. Yeah, I'll lower my head.
Late night Twilight Zone radio host voice. It's good.
No, seriously, like this is like I'm totally hypnotized by Michael's voice, and it's just like, okay, I completely forget what I was about to talk. Okay, no, I will lower my hand now, and I will try to remember what Paul said about. So I'm sorry for the noise.
I was just going to comment on Michael, what you said. Oh, I didn't raise my hand. Sorry, David. Just real quick, I'll comment on at least what we do know about usage is we have almost 10 to 1 self-managed users are creating snippets versus SaaS. So we can pretty safely say if we were to build this now, we're building it for self-managed organizations. We don't know why, and there's an issue on the backlog. Could be data is not getting collected or reported correctly. It could be that is actually the case, and people on SaaS don't create snippets as often because they're doing things more for themselves or in smaller groups. I don't know. But right now, that's where the data seems to indicate as far as who's using it. So if you think about a larger organization needing to share code snippets and reusable bits of code around their org, maybe for onboarding purposes or for documentation, internal documentation or external documentation, I think that's probably our core use case right now.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that strikes me definitely as a possibility for like maintaining internal documentation or trading internal code in a concise way. I only raised my hand because I'm just very curious about the contextual history of snippets. Who were they originally designed for? What was the gap that we were originally looking to close when we opted to create them?
Was anybody here for that?
Does anybody know?
I'm sure it was a follow-up on Gist, and Lord knows what good Gist is. It does seem they seem popular. They seem to be used quite frequently. Usually I see them as like, here's a way to do something, and it's just somebody's hosted that somewhere.
You're up, Dennis.
Okay. Yeah. So just two points. Now I remember what Paul said that triggered my attention and raised hand. So the interesting use case Paul mentioned to use the executable snippets. I'm not sure whether in the context of the third, of this showcasing what the libraries can do or something like this. Technically, in this scenario, we are talking about sort of a different thing. Like if we talk about conventional snippets as we have them now, they are indeed were intended to be competing with Gist. Never happened really. Like people still use Gists. They don't use GitLab snippets. But this is sort of one sort of paradigm where it works. But if we're talking about showcasing, this means that we are trying to look into something like storybook, where things are kind of documented and provided in the visual way of what a library does, at least for the UI libraries, for things that are visual, right? And then the whole paradigm and the whole the whole discussion should be a bit different, I think, because then we will have to employ different tools, employ different approaches. But this, like technically everything, any decision now boils down to clear understanding of who are the users of this feature, like who we are trying to, at least, even if we don't know who we are going to, who is this feature for at the moment, at minimum, we have to realize who we want to use this feature after we're done. Who is our target audience if the audience is unknown now, or we want to change the audience. And I have a strong feeling that we have no answers to any of these questions, to be honest. And that's the main problem, because without clear understanding of the answers to these two questions, everything we're talking about is just speculation and our personal wish as engineers working at GitLab about how this feature could be potentially used. We never know. Like we saw that gists are used by people. Why not use GitLab snippets? But people don't use this for the use cases where they can use gists. So this may be due to different reasons. Like first of all, that GitHub is much better integrated in different services and different things. And when people write blog posts or do something, it's nearly there is a much bigger case that there is really neat kind of integration, if not full integration to GitHub and gists, and that's why people just fall back to that. But this is the symptom. This is not the main problem. The main problem is that we do not understand who this feature is for and who is this feature gonna be for in the future. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think you're right on the money with that. That's the big money question, and I would propose going a step further, and rather than just thinking who is the target audience, really understanding what problems are people having that could be solved, and then we'll figure out, okay, marketing to these specific people, and so thinking about what are the problems that people use and that this new tool would help solve, I think is critical. I think some things that are really vague, I have a hard time seeing how executable snippets could be helpful in code review. I'd love to know more about that idea of what are the problems we're trying to solve there. What are the actual, like, what's an example interaction? And when I think of like showcasing, I don't really know if executable snippets is that much better than like a GitLab pages. And so I don't really know if that is a problem, but maybe it is. I had some other interesting points that might point out some other potential use cases looking out in the wild. I could dive into those, or Eric, I see that you have a hand up.
Oh, go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're just the proverbial hand is there.
Yeah.
So one, I don't know if anyone has used Jupyter Notebook for writing Python scripts. It's a really interesting executable snippet environment where you're writing lines of code, but you can execute each block and get like immediate feedback of what happened, and all of it. Usually these Jupyter scripts, so think of like a data scientist. I'm not really writing something that I'm going to reuse. I'm not really developing software. I'm like writing one script that's like, I'm trying to pull data down and I need to manipulate it. I need to look at it somehow. I need to do stuff with it. And then finally I got my output. I'm going to write it to a file and download. That's a really interesting, just out there in the wild, executable snippet phenomenon. So wanted to throw that out there, and I added that to the agenda. Then I also linked to the top GIFs. Unfortunately, I can't find our top snippets. I don't know if we have that feature where you can see top snippets. I don't know if you can find it, that'd be great. The top gists, I'm going to share my screen and we can see how people will use this. So I see, oh, here I am on page 2. So these are the starred ones. There's some that are like not super starred, and there's some that have a good amount of stars. But like there's just markdown documents, nothing to execute. Here's just like a config file. There's not really anything that would make sense executing. Here's one that I saw and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like there's a lot of the snippets that are like, oh, how to build, how to start a web server and just a single file. and things like that I could see, it's be interesting to actually run it before running it locally or something. But a lot of this stuff is just config files. I see a lot of just config files, and then a lot of the like one single file script stuff. But I know also just don't have multi-files, or maybe they do. And so they're limited on that tool. But
They
just to
do.
give some more thoughts of how it's being
There-
used. They do have it?
Yeah, there is the upper one set like 6 files, 2 files. Like if you scroll on the same page.
I see. It does say that.
Yeah. So they do.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, I thought that's interesting. I mean, there's a good, just looking at the ones that are highly starred and voted are pretty close to Markdown, and or these like code examples are probably the second category of things, just eyeballing this.
I mean, so I think we're hitting on a few really good points, Dennis, that you make about we need to think about who we're using, what problems we're solving, and then looking at the most frequently or most popular types of snippets and reconciling that with the feature request itself, or the desire to enhance snippet functionality to the point that they're executable don't exactly match. So what we would be, I think what we'd be saying if we were to implement this feature is that we are enabling new use cases that are not necessarily what our users are going to snippets for today. And I think what we've talked about, some really good examples, like the one that jumps out in my mind is like the documentation page for Stripe, the like gold standard for documentation. I believe they have, code examples in line with their API documentation, but that those code examples are live and you can actually type and it'll return results. If I'm remembering, I believe that was Stripe's documentation. I think you're right, that could be done just by hosting something on Pages and having some client-side JavaScript that's compiling and returning results. So it doesn't even need to be done with snippets. But if you think about, sorry, every time I unmute, if you think about how we could, in the context of a wiki or in the context of embedding a snippet in an external site, so whether it's hosted on Pages or not, that could be executable in that fashion. That could be a playground for others to implement or interact with your APIs or your project's output and give live examples, similar to, like you said, Jupyter Notebook, or I wrote Xcode playgrounds because that's kind of where I've spent a bit of time messing around, and it's kind of fun. But you can do the same thing where as you're typing, every expression shows output on the side, and you can manipulate that output, and it's really interesting. That's sort of the like extreme of this conversation, which is taking snippets in an entirely different direction. That doesn't benefit, to your point earlier, that doesn't benefit config files. We're not going to execute those config files. There's no reason to. So maybe the discussion, if and when we do this, is this even called snippets? Are we enabling something different? Is this actually part of the remote development environment functionality? Or is this, is this really just like a next level of live preview or something like that? Michael's got his hand up, so I'll stop talking. Oh, you're muted, Michael.
Yeah, so Paul's exploration of going through GitHub was good because I was like, oh, yeah, we have an Explore feature in our world, but we don't have a way to start. And when we were working in navigation and settings, one of the things that came out was like bookmarking things. Maybe a small thing would be to like start these things and like make people, like this will probably help internal people, but also give us a signal of what people are like starring and like what's useful to people. So it works both ways. So that might be like, it's not executable, but it might help just organizing. And then like yeah, for the stuff like showing code examples, sometimes on GitHub I do find that like having like people who share stuff and then have a simple project that just like download this and see how it runs. It's almost like a pathway to do that for us, rather than building this whole thing out, is building like a pathway to like start a new project. So like, let's say I have like a view file or like a React component, and it's like, cool, here's how do you want to like share it, and then you press like, yeah, create a project from this, and it creates all the scaffolding for like a React project and sticks it in there for you, and you're like, cool, now I have like an easy way to share this. And then we can then leverage like Gitpod or like live review app or whatever we already have. We don't need to build all that stuff, or people can just do whatever they want with that project. Well, we don't need to build it. Then we get this whole like cross stage thing where like from a snippet you create a project and a project count, and all those things go up as well. So yeah, and then Jupyter, yeah, with that editing experience, it's kind of like an editable mermaid diagram or something like that, but like you can actually run the code for it. So this could be like an extreme version of, you know how we're thinking about editing in blocks in the content editor. And so we would have like a mermaid block, and then maybe we have like something like a stats one where you like pull in like chart.js, and then you have a JSON file, or like, you know, whatever you do to join those things. But maybe that's like a very elaborate widget that we build for the content editor. David?
I just wanted to raise, it's more low level than I would normally raise in a Think Big session, but just something around snippets when compared to Paul's exploration there of GitHub is something that I have been asked multiple times by multiple different people, which I thought was kind of interesting because I had never even thought about it. Was people were wondering, how did we grep or explore our snippets that were publicly available on our SaaS projects? And was there any long-term vision to making that something easier? And that, for me, kind of falls in a little bit with, again, this reinforced idea of providing good documentation and letting people explore these, you know, config files, these sample configs. I'm thinking of things like pipeline CI files as an example. Like, I think Chad once had this idea of the fastest CI file you could possibly have to bootstrap a project for quick pipeline times, and it's, you know, endorsed by GitLab or something similar. It doesn't completely relate to the embedded snippet, so I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with it, but it just is something that has come up a couple of times, and so I just wanted to flag it.
Definitely organization, tagging, starring, embedding, sharing. Those are all things that we could have larger conversations about. They're a little more understood than I would probably bring up in a Think Big, because they're kind of like, we actually just need to think tactically. But okay. But yeah, those are good points, absolutely, and would benefit snippets for sure. Dennis was next, I think.
Yeah, my points are not particular, like not directly related to the executable snippets. It's more on the general snippets idea and about figuring out who is actually using this feature and why people don't use this feature technically. So I think because I still think that we have to answer those questions, and in order to answer those questions, we need statistics. We need statistical data. We need some research. In order to get the statistical data, we need more people to start using the feature and telling us what is good, what is not, how they use it, what they use it for. And here comes the idea that I had long time ago when we just started refactoring the snippets, like 2 years ago or something like this, about being able, like providing users with an easy mechanism of creating the snippets. So I'm doing a review of an MR, and I see nice code, nice execution that I don't want to forget. I go on, copy the text in the diff. I right click or do the keystroke, and I select save as snippet. It goes into my personal snippets. Boom. The way to reach out to the snippets becomes like super fast, super short, and we would allow people to actually build this base, and we will build the user base for this feature that we could use after some time to run a research and figure out what this feature is used for. The problem, though, is that once we make creation of the snippets easy, we will face another problem of the massive storage format for the snippets. So it will be all in one place, like huge list of snippets, and then we will have to come up with some structure to the snippets. But that's another story. That's after we get some information. I think we would need to do something about the easier reach to the snippets, to the feature, so that we could get this statistical data, and yeah, like easier creation of the snippets instead of like copy pasting, going to create new snippet, like filling out the things. It's just like it's just way too long, and like we have to provide this in context. Again, getting back to the in context editing, we have to review the in context content creation, in this case in context creation of the snippet. So I'm still in the context of the merge request review. I copy the text, I do some action, keystroke, right click, create a snippet, boom. It's generated with some dummy title, or like auto-generated title, but it's there. I don't lose it, I don't miss it. And then we will be able to gather the statistical data. I repeat myself, but just to, when I talk through this, I kind of understand it better for myself in the first place. So that was the whole point. I'm done.
I wanted to throw a crazy idea of what if, instead of thinking just ourselves to snippets, what if it was just executable arbitrary code, which I think may actually be the name of a security vulnerability, but never mind that. So what if, I mean, snippets may be the way we implement this, but I mean, I can see it being really cool if I'm typing a markdown comment or something, being, I'm saying, hey, backtick, this is JavaScript, let's go to make it executable, this so they can see how it actually runs or whatever. So like, what if it was baked into markdown comments? Would be pretty sweet.
Executable arbitrary code blocks does sound scary, but also very cool and very useful across the platform.
I'm sure a security team will love this idea.
Well, I guess, yeah, maybe to take that a little further, to make it more secure, potentially, like we could have those be snippets. You could embed an executable snippet as a code block, and then we rely on the security of the snippets feature. However, we figure out how to make this secure to handle that concern. And that way it's not necessarily like I'm going to write arbitrary code and execute it in line. It's like we've got snippet feature that's already we've already figured out how to ensure security, and then you just embed it. That could
Yeah.
be a way around it.
And not to also just propose thinking of it differently. The implementation, there may be a shared implementation that snippets happens to use and markdown comments happen to use. Like the abstraction may not be with snippets. The abstraction may be this, I want some sort of arbitrary code runtime environment.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And Dennis, back to what you were saying, I think there are other ways before we go ahead and build it to validate, or before we get critical mass of users to validate the problem and the users. And that's a good point, that this is a great example of something that we would want to run proper competitive analysis and problem validation and do active research, find people to talk to about the problems they're actually trying to solve, about why they're using certain things over GitLab, or if there is a problem that's not being solved by any platform that we might be able to be positioned to solve for them. I think it would be more likely to to answer our question if we took a more interview and research based, rather than trying to get snippets to be so popular that we can extract from the usage data the problem itself. That said, Michael left a comment in the agenda doc that I wanted to revisit about if snippets are used more on self-hosted, is it more like a replacement for CodePen for internal users? And so I wanted to go back. I don't want to like shift our think big to just saying like, let's build CodePen, but maybe we could just talk about what are the benefits you as designers and developers get from something like CodePen, and would it be beneficial to have that closer to your GitLab experience, right? Like embedded within the GitLab experience. Is there any benefit there? And that's, as far as I understand, more in line with what we would be talking about client side execution anyway. And we wouldn't be as, and maybe that's a smaller surface area to discuss.
Yeah, so for CodePen stuff, I used to use it to show like front-end interaction or CSS stuff that's like focused on the thing, so that the engineer can almost like cut and paste that. But from an internal perspective, so what you would need to do is almost like work in rectangles, because you don't want to like share the exact like code and like structure of like, oh, this is how I did it. This is how we do it at this company, because then someone can just like snatch it and get it. But if self-hosted, it feels like there's probably firewalls everywhere, so then I can't go to CodePen. So that's like, I'm thinking from my banking days, like you can't go anywhere except like certain websites. So it's almost like, yeah, it's a good question, like why is it used more? So yeah, code examples, essentially snippets that people can cut and paste and put in their code, and yeah, try to make it work.
Eric, you have your hand.
Sorry,
raised.
I never put my hand down. Go ahead, Dennis.
Oh, okay. When it comes to CodePen, Code Sandbox, like Code Anything, I personally don't use those for code sharing at all. Like I don't remember. Like I used CodePen, I think, a couple of times just to embed the code snippets in my articles, but only because that was a requirement from the publisher. So otherwise, for my day-to-day job, I don't do that. I don't share my share code with people. And when I have to do this, it's more related to the project, and I just share the link to the project. But what I use these services for in particular is to actually play with, to play with JavaScript in isolation, in sandbox manner, to actually get it executed and see the result without actually, in these cases, I much more prefer this to be isolated and not be part of my project without pulling all the project dependencies. I just want to see whether the concepts I have in my head are actually working in plain JavaScript. And that's when I use this. But then I just reach out to GSBeam, for example, where they have really nice console output and are JavaScript oriented. And that's pretty much how I use these services. So, and I know a lot of developers use it in the same manner, like not for sharing, but for actually POCing their ideas in the isolated manner. Yeah, Paul.
Hey, yeah, I was adding to the agenda of one of the things that I've used CodePen-like services, which is really helpful, is with teaching other people front-end development, because the feedback loop is so short. If I make a change, I can visually see the change. The scope of the changes I make, though, are also really short. It's just all right there. Back in the day, I remember using JS Fiddle a lot, and they actually have a live, they have a multiplayer Fiddle experience where, and I don't think CodePen does this, but you can live program multiple cursors on doing the same JS Fiddle, and that's super helpful and super cool. Something that I can find personally myself using it is it can be really helpful because you don't have to set up Webpack and all the other things if you want to be using some, or Babel if you want to be using some modern things. And it's just because right now front-end development has gotten so complicated. So that's a huge win of I don't have to set up the dev environment. It's just there. And if I want to play around with something, and I also don't have to tear down whatever environment I'm currently working in if that's the situation as well too. It's just there.
You're just going to keep bringing up benefits to the remote development environment until we start talking about that topic. Similar positioning, and worth pointing out that they could be tightly related down the road. But yeah, I think that short feedback loop is the critical point there. And so if we were to do something like this, the two things we'd want to push on are use cases where it's around sharing and documentation, and then other use cases where it's around just shortening that feedback loop and getting to a point where you can give something a try without spinning up an environment or creating, running any packages locally or setting up a dev environment. That makes me nervous because we'd have to be really opinionated about what kind of environment we set up, and is that what everybody wants. We'd have to be pretty, I don't know. We'd have to cast a pretty wide net there. But for JavaScript and stuff, like a real basic use case, would be pretty straightforward, I imagine. The education aspect is interesting too, Paul, with like teaching, but I think that goes back to sort of the live documentation, because your goal in both cases is education. You're learning by doing, you're either, I don't want to start the conversation this late into our session about collaborative editing and multi user simultaneous editing, but that would be a cool feature too in a think big scenario. If you could have executable snippets, but also have multiple people editing the snippet at the same time, this would be a pretty useful tool for pairing or teaching or otherwise troubleshooting with somebody. And then pair that with your idea of like project-based environment, project-based snippets that inherit the environments of the project and have some level of remote development execution. On the server side, you could troubleshoot and pair bugs and with almost no setup. You know, you just spin up a snippet, let's dig in and start working. An argument can be made, then you could just do that in the web IDE or whatever, and then save it out as a snippet later. Maybe that doesn't need to start as a snippet. But I think these things are all pretty closely related at this point. So
yeah. On the note of the problem of like educating, whether it be, you know, we're educating about the language, we're educating about the specific library. Sorry, I don't have my hand up, but I do realize I was unmuted, which I think is like having super hand up. I'm joking. The collaborative editing is just kind of nice. I still haven't seen that being like, oh, this is a game changer. But what is a game changer is incredibly short feedback loop. I make a change, I see the change. And you mentioned that's how you learning by doing. And if that's a problem we want to explore, those are some of the requirements I think there, which make it valuable.
go for it, David.
I was just going to kind of chime in agreement with the more we talk it out, the more the idea of the I don't even know the right word. I'm going to use this arbitrary executable piece of code that you could write into Markdown sounds like the right direction for the broadest appeal to the developers for just various scenarios. I mean, it seems like it would be highly useful to be able to do that. And again, it kind of subtly reminds me of when, as a developer, you'd be on Stack Overflow and you're looking for a solution. And not only do you see the code, but you can actually see the effect the code has by clicking run. And that is worth its weight in gold.
We don't need to belabor the points. If nobody has any additional insights or ideas, we can end a little early. But I did just want to kind of close the loop and say that whether or not we do this, the next step for me is pretty clear, which is we need to do some problem validation and figure out what problems we're really solving here and for whom we are solving them, as well as who else is attempting to solve these and how are they approaching it. So I think when we think about the feature itself and all these different use cases in education and documentation, that's all just helping me form the right questions to ask during the problem validation and find the right people to talk to about what problems they have. Yeah. Sorry about this.
No, you're totally good. I wanted to just encourage, as we do think about it, not to feel like all roads lead to, you know, this remote development environment that we have to spin up for everybody. And I think there's some options that could allow us for lots and lots of different languages run these things on the client side. Considering WebAssembly, like you could have a WebAssembly build of Python that runs Python scripts in some sort of browser-based containerized environment. And like, so there's, those are all part of the solution, and I don't think should block us considering something if it'd be really valuable and really cool. Yeah.
Back to your point, David, just like the idea of having that that build and run button at the top of a block of code. Is I agree. Like that's, I think, like the vision, and then we just work backwards from there. Like who's that going to be useful for, and what scenarios? No, you can't have my headphones. And then you can start finding people who might benefit from that.
Headphones.
Here, you want one?
Yes.
Here you go.
I want one. No.
No? All right.
I want the one.
Anyway, yeah, I think that it would be cool to just have a block of code and say, run this. Maybe it's only for JavaScript or other, language that can be compiled client side. And that seems like the first step if we're thinking in the near future. And longer term client side evaluation could be cool too. But that's probably an even narrower use case that we would need to explore.
Oh no. My headphones.
Oh no.
Oh no, my headphone.
I need to put that.
Okay, here you go.
That's really fantastic. That sounds like we're very, very much aligned on a general idea. And I really like, Eric, the idea of starting with that like North Star, think big, end goal, and then working backwards iteratively from it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all we can do for a lot of our categories is just dream like, oh, how cool could this be in 3 to 5 years? And then we can work backwards and say, does anybody else get to use that? Is that what people want or are asking for? Do they even know that they want that? If we start coming up with these ideas in a more tangible way that we can take to research, then we can talk about like, is this solving a problem for your organization? Is this solving a problem for you individually? Is this something you would use in the context of your documentation site? Say in the context of wiki or something like that. Would you create a wiki that documents your API if it had live snippets that could execute code or something like that? And then gather that information and make decisions accordingly. Well, we only have a few minutes until scheduled time. Any parting thoughts on executable snippets before we wrap? This has been fun. I'm glad I wasn't expecting quite as lively a discussion on executable snippets. I'm glad we picked this one.
I'm sure we can produce the same lively discussion on pretty much any topic.
Yeah, true. I always enjoy our think bigs on any topic, even before they were in the framework of this meeting. But it's always fun to chat with you all about where we could be headed. For those that missed it, I'll post this. I don't have any delusions that these 90-minute sessions are watched a ton on YouTube, like end to end, but hopefully we can post this to our teammates that couldn't join, and then also anybody else that might be interested in for posterity when we go back to do some solution or problem validation on this, we can reference our video. So thanks for your input. Have a good rest of the day. And take care. See you next time. Bye.
Oh,